Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV. And 80 years ago, while some American units were still engaged in Brittany, and we covered that very recently on the channel, others were already bearing down on Metz, close to Germany, right the way the other side of France. Phil Bradley returns to the channel to talk about the 5th Infantry Division crossing the Moselle River. I'll bring him in now. Evening where you are, morning, Rama. How are you, Phil, today?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Paul. Good to be on.
So, as we'll find out, this is the period of the war where the Allies are doing a lot of stuff in a lot of areas, which is great, but it is stretching them. It's stretching resources because of the sheer distances over which they're operating. So you were on a trip there fairly recently. What struck you about wanting to do this particular battle on the channel?
So I was over there last year when I was in France, and I'd gone to Metz. Actually, Metz is a great military history through that area because of the various battles over the years. But many years ago, I'd been there about 40 years ago, and there was a museum in a little town called Gravelotte just outside of Metz, just on the Verdun Road out of Metz, where there was a big battle in 1870, the Prussian army against the French, where they'd cut off Metz and basically finally surrendered. And then, so that museum has now been upgraded big time by the European Union to a massive museum all about reconciliation and such. But so I wanted to visit it again. And it just so happens that this story of the crossing of the Moselle by the Third Army in September 1944 happened in the same area. So, yeah, got interested in that and thought it'd fit in well with your channel. So.
And it has that connection because so many of these places, like we talked about Saint-Malo and Brest and Verdun and Metz, they have that kind of long-term, they've always been military hubs. They've always had that, locations like that. The significance of them doesn't change because the wars change. You've got river crossings, you've got transport, you've got citadels on hills, that kind of thing. So that's where that study of history going back a few centuries always helps. Even though we're focusing on World War II, there's this long-term aspect that makes it interesting. But anyway, back over to you. We'll start with lots of slides today, folks. And as you know, with Phil, the story will be covered in great detail, but that doesn't mean we don't appreciate your questions. So keep firing away. But over to you, get Phil to take us through this.
Okay, Paul. So what we've got here is a map of the Third Army advance from Normandy to Metz, and obviously they had taken a side trip, one of the corps, into Brittany, which you've been dealing with recently. So at the same time as this is happening, they're still fighting for Brest at the very western edge
literally
of
the two extremes of that map there.
So you can basically see how big an area Third Army was covering at that time. But we're going to deal with the battle at Metz. So you can see there that we'll bring up the next slide. Yeah. So you can see there Third Army dispositions on 5th of September 1944. So the Third Army had reached Verdun and taken Verdun and had crossed the Meuse River there, and that was their. And then they were waiting supplies. So basically, as soon as they got supplies, the word was to head further east. And actually, the orders on 5th of September were there was a field order. Field Order 10 was issued to grab a bridgehead across the Moselle and strike for the Rhine River at Frankfurt and Mainz. So that was the objective of this operation. You go to the next picture. So here we can see General Patton coming across the Seine River, where they crossed the Seine River further back, moving up towards Verdun. So you can see the bridges there, and they would obviously need bridges to cross the Moselle as well. Next slide. If we have a look at this is so we're talking about 20 Corps, which is General Walker's corps in Third Army, and at this stage, if you look at down the bottom, you can see the 5th Division. The 5th Division was deployed, and their 3 regiments would advance on Metz on three axes. So you can see there one of the regiments to the north, one in the center, and one in the south. And we're going to deal with the regiment in the north, which is the 11th Regiment. Next slide. So it's a bit hard to see, but basically the advance General Walker, so he had ordered General Irwin was the commander of 5th Division, and he had ordered him to follow the 7th Armored Division, which was another division in that corps, to the Moselle River, and the 7th Armored was to find a way across, and the 5th Infantry Division was to follow. One of the problems they had at this stage was these are nice maps, but they didn't have maps of the area. They were using Michelin road maps. They'd run out of because they'd advanced so quickly. So there were certainly issues with just where they were going, where the roads were going, and these are quite restricted areas to the west of Metz. Basically, the roads follow basically ravines, and so it would be difficult to if there was German opposition, it would be difficult to reach the Moselle. We go to the next slide. So we can look here at the organisation of the army. So we've got 3rd Army, and on the right there you've got 20 Corps under General Walker. So he had 2 infantry divisions, the 5th and the 90th, and the 7th Armored Division. So the one we're dealing with is the 5th Infantry Division, which is General Irwin's, and then you'll see the 11th Regiment at the bottom. So the 7th Combat Command B of the 7th Armored Division, they moved off through what they call the Gauze Ravine, which brings you out on the Moselle just to the south of Metz. But they'd been held up when they reached the river. If we can go to the next slide. So this guy is, as it says there, Lieutenant Colonel Kelly Lemon. So Kelly Lemon was the commander of the 2nd Battalion of the 11th Regiment, and it would be his battalion that would be involved in this crossing at Dornot, as the French pronounce it. So what had happened is the scout unit from the 23rd Armoured Infantry Battalion, part of 7th Armoured, had reached the river on the afternoon of the 7th of September. Actually, early morning, they'd reached the river, and they'd actually put 3 boats across with a reconnaissance unit, just to see if they could get across. But they'd come under fire in daylight, and they'd pulled back. So they pulled back to the west bank. This would have major ramifications for the commander of Combat Command B, which was Brigadier General John Thompson, and he was actually relieved of his command because obviously word got back to Patton that a unit had crossed the river and then had pulled back again. And it wasn't until 1958 that he was reinstated. That had been the wrong thing to do. So if you read there that so Colonel Lemon, he believed that the 7th Armoured had already crossed, but he was ordered when he was ordered to do the crossing himself. And so now we're moving forward to the 8th of May.
And there's a bit of a background. Neither the 5th Infantry or the 7th Armoured have really had a huge amount of tough engagements on their way. I mean, the 90th have had their, I mean, we're not talking about them. They've had their ordeals in Normandy, but the 5th have kind of been rolling up a bit. The Germans, a bit of liberation. The 7th, similar thing. So they're kind of experienced, but they haven't really been tested yet. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
If we go to the next slide. So now we'll have a look at what they're coming up against on the other side. So the Germans had actually done well to pull together a division on the other side, which was created called the 462nd Division under General Kraus. So they actually pulled all sorts of people into this division. So they actually had an officer candidate regiment made up of officer candidates who were training in Metz. So they formed part of one regiment. And they also had like what they called a stomach battalion, which was Battalion Voss. So these are guys with stomach complaints. So they're all in the same unit so they could be given the right dietary requirements. But backing them up, and they also actually had a battalion formed from the SS Signal School, which was also in Metz. And so these were signalers which had been formed into a fighting unit. But backing them up, they had the 17th SS Panzer Grenadier Division, who you remember from Normandy.
Yeah.
So they were the remains of them were sort of been put together as a reserve in that area, and they were reinforced by 2 regiments of SS which had come down from Denmark. So these men had moved into those regiments. So the regiments were quite strong, the Panzer Grenadier regiments, and so it was a formidable sort of force. But they certainly weren't holding a continuous front line. But they were, as we'll see, they were very much helped by the terrain and also the fortifications that were in that area. We can go to the next slide.
And September and October across the EGO were very much when the Allies were finding out that the Germans were actually reasonably adept at putting together these units that weren't seemingly top grade frontline units. It happened in the Hurtgen a little bit. It certainly happened at Market Garden. Ultra was kind of giving the Allies, look, these units, they're signals guys, they're training battalions, they're schools, they're this, that, and the other. And maybe the Allies were a bit guilty of dismissing the ability of them. But as was proven over the next few weeks, some of these supposedly third grade units were actually pretty well motivated, even though the Allies are gradually thinking that the Germans are thoroughly beaten. It's not really the case yet.
Yeah, that's true. So here we can. So the commander of 11th Regiment was a Colonel Ewell, and he actually preferred to cross the river further south from Dornot, down at Arnaville, which is about 2 kilometres further south. But he was ordered to make the crossing here, where the 7th Armoured had got across in a recon. So they arrived in the evening of 7th of September. So here they are actually moving through Dornot. So Dornot is high up, and so they're moving down towards the river, which is in the middle distance. And then on the other side, you can see the high ground on the eastern side of the Moselle. If we go to the next slide, you'll see the same. So that's the same location today. And this little town of Dornot, it's very proud of this. The history involved in the Moselle crossing. So there's little placards and such all around the town, little then and now photographs, and it's a really nice little way to be proud of what happened at that time. If we go to the next slide. So here we can see it on the map. You can see Dornot, and they're moving down through Dornot, and they would cross. There's a railway line, and there's an overbridge, pedestrian overbridge. Then they would go past the lake, and on the other side of the lake is the Moselle, and they would cross, and that's where they would make their crossing. So when they moved through Dornot, it was pretty chaotic, and Colonel Allison from the Armoured Infantry Battalion, he was attached to them at that stage, and he sort of arranged the boats. So at 0800 on the 8th, some boats arrived, and at 10:45, 3 rifle companies from the 2nd 11th moved up to the river. If we go to the next slide. So here's that railway overbridge. So you can see there one of the infantrymen moving up with a looks like a 30 cal Browning water-cooled over his shoulder. So there, and
the grease gun, 2 weapons,
and the grease gun over his back. Yeah, so he's pretty well loaded. But obviously they know they need to get, if they're going to go across and hold this bridgehead, they're going to need machine guns, and they also took over mortars with them. But you'll see in a minute the size of the boats really restricted just what they could carry across. If we go to the next slide, so that's the same overbridge. It's still there today. Still there today over the railway. Go to the next slide. And there you can see that's looking back towards Dornot from where he's come. So this guy's another machine gunner. Crossing the railway below the overpass there, Dornot in the background, and that's looking the same direction. I couldn't get onto the railway tracks to get the same shot, but that's looking back. That's also looking back towards Dornot, and you can see the same bridge there today. You go to the next slide. And this was taken, you can see the railway bridge in the background, and this was taken while they're under fire, moving across that open ground from the bridge towards the river.
And just to pay tribute to these amazing cameramen taking these photos in the middle of the action. Without their work, we wouldn't be able to put these kind of things together. Incredible bravery to do this.
Well, as you know, Paul, from some of the Normandy photographs, the US Signal Corps, they were incredible photographers. Yeah. So these aren't civilian photographers; these are embedded photographers who were taught how to photograph. They take the same risks, probably more risks than the men on the ground. Yeah. So yeah, we're very grateful to be able to see these photographs. And that's the same area today, looking back towards Dornot. And that's the track now from the railway. You see the railway in the background, and the Moselle's behind me in that photo. This is a map drawn at the time. So you can see they cross the overpass. They go down to the lagoon. There's actually a German machine gun off to the side, which they had to take care of. And then the side of the river crossing is just there opposite the lagoon. Next slide. It's one of the, so I'll just read Sergeant Norman Rifkin. So he was with Company K. So Company K was actually from the 3rd Battalion. So it was attached to the 2nd Battalion for this operation. So as he says there, my company was gathered in a little village overlooking a river, and we were split into groups of 8 to cross it. I was in charge of the embarkation for one team plus 2 engineers. Left the village to get to the bank, but before able to cover 300 metres and the assault boats, the German artillery opened fire. There was such a barrage from the 88 guns, such a deluge, that for a moment the men fell into panic, hugging the ground to avoid the shots. My team did its best, and finally we did reach the bank. Just as I leapt into the boat, one engineer was able to was ready to paddle off, but no one else from my team followed me. Some were traumatised by the violence of the firing, while others hadn't heard my order to advance because of the chaos of battle. Finally, one of my men joined me, then a second, and then all of the others.
Wow.
Next slide. And this was actually taken at the crossing. So they're just little boats, probably similar to the ones that we know from a Bridge Too Far movie. But there wasn't much to them. Small US assault boats. So they were just.
I have actually done a river crossing in one of them for some film work years ago, and about once you get 8 of you in there, it's they're very unstable. They wobble. They feel like they're going to break every second. It's terrifying.
So. So they started to cross at 11:15. So what time is it there now for you? It's 10:15, is it not?
10:15, yeah.
Okay, so an hour from now was when they started their crossing 80 years ago.
And you're saying there had been a reconnaissance in this exact place by the 7th Eye. Is that what you said?
Yeah, in this area, on the previous night.
Because I don't want to go down a massive rabbit hole, but it's interesting when I was doing the Italy shows about the crossing of the Po and the Rapido and things like that with various historians. There were lots of debates about if you've done a reconnaissance across in one place, of course that's the logical place to do the big one because you know what's over there. So it's interesting that in this case, some of the commanders thought down the river might be better, but it does seem to be solid military practice to, if you've managed to get across and you know what it's like, to kind of follow in behind there. But of course, there are going to be exceptions to that rule. It's that complication of actual combat.
Yeah, the recon might have been a little bit further north, but you'll see in a minute the width of the river here is quite narrow, so it's quite a good place to cross, and it's quite placid. So if we go to the next slide, we'll be seeing that soon. Again, this is another photo taken at the time, and that shows them approaching what they will call Horseshoe Wood, which was a wood on the other side of the river. So this is the other thing, they're crossing at where there's a wood, so they've got protection from observation further out from the trees. And that's the crossing today. So you can see there it's quite it's not too wide, and it's quite placid at that time. And the interesting thing for me was, so I'd gone to the crossing to see this, and then I looked across the river, and there you can see a memorial on the other side of the river, obviously also commemorating the assault. So I actually had to drive about 10 kilometres further upstream to get across the river and then come back. But as you'll see from the photos that follow, it was quite worth it. So yeah, so F Company went across, and then G Company, and then they also took across, as you saw, the heavy machine gun plus some mortar, plus the mortar platoon. They also had support from a mortar from the third battalion of the 11th Regiment, which was south of Dornot, but that was limited by the limited ammunition. So F Company crossed, G Company crossed, and then E Company crossed, and also a platoon from the 23rd Armoured Regiment of 48 men, and also K Company from the 3rd 11th across. So 4 companies crossed, and then two companies would make an advance. Now, one of the things that happened here is they were lucky enough, they hit right at the boundary of 2 German units. So they hit at the boundary of the Voss and Berg battalions. So the Voss battalion was the Stomach battalion, which were on the south. and the Berg Battalion was the one on the north, and they contained the those signal from the signal company. So by the time it was now afternoon, and they decided they would advance F and G company. So two companies would advance on. They knew there were fortresses further ahead, and we'll discuss those. We'll discuss those in a minute. So if we go,
and I guess you could also bring in what they can call on if they run into troubles. Because
so you can see
the issue.
You can see there two forts. So Fort St. Blaise and Fort Somme. Fort St. Blaise normally. So these were constructed in the time of after the 1870 war. So between 1904 and 1914, so prior to the First World War, these were part of a group of 8 fortresses that were constructed around Metz by the Germans. And then later, obviously, after the First World War, they were taken over by the French.
Yeah.
So if you go to the next slide. So there you can see an aerial view. So you can see at the bottom of the picture, the lagoon from where the crossing was made. Then you can see Horseshoe Wood, the wooded area, just in front of the river there. And then you can see the forts up on top of the hill. So you see Fort St. Blaise on the left, Fort Somme on the right. So the advance took place from that wood up towards Fort St. Blaise was the one they were heading for initially. If we go to the next slide. Okay, so this slide, if you look down, you see Dornot down the bottom left corner. And then you'll see number 28. So number 28 is this, what they call Group Fortified Verdun. So it was named after the Battle of the First World War. And so this, as I say, this contained 2 forts. It was originally built by the Germans as Fest Hassler, but the French obviously changed the name to Group Verdun. So as I say, it contained the 2 forts. And that was just one of a whole, as you can see, a whole series of outer forts which surrounded Metz and also extended up to Thionville, which is north of Metz. And these were very strong positions. The inner forts are older forts, but also would have to be reduced. If we go to the next slide. So this is an aerial sketch, of Fort St. Blaise. So you can see there's 2 batteries. One is 4 100mm guns, and one is 4 152mm guns. At this stage, actually, none of these guns were operating. All their sighting equipment had been taken out. And though they did start to operate on some of the other forts, this fort was not operating at the time, but it was still a very strong position. If we go to the next slide. So there you can see you've got the 100mm batteries down the bottom and the 152mm batteries at the top. But also these are forts in turrets, guns in turrets. Sorry, if you like. We go to the next slide. So this is actually from a forts adjacent to that, which I managed to get into some years ago. This was from Fest Wagner, which is further east, but it's exactly the same setup. So there you can see one of the 100mm turrets in one of the forts. If we go to the next one, and these are the 152mm guns, and this is actually from Fort St. Blaise. I got these from someone else who'd been there. So this was
clearly, with the fact that these have been here for decades, there's intel available about these to the Allies.
Yes, but the frontline troops wouldn't have had any idea at this stage of it.
Yeah, fair enough.
Later they would work it out a bit, but you'll see that these are very strong positions. They're not easily taken. So we go to the next slide. I'll just show you a bit about the fort. So the fort's also surrounded by these fences. So these fences would have been in quite good condition at the time of the battle. So these had to be surmounted, as well as barbed wire positions. So they're quite. So that's the front of, that's Fort St. Blaise. That's the front wall of the Casemate 1, which is the Casemate, one of the Casemates. So that's after it was bombed from the air later in the battle, but just made a hole in it, but didn't actually destroy it. If you go to the next slide. And that's the same position today. So the fortress is still there today.
Great photos.
So this is from one of the fortresses further north at Thionville, which you can actually visit, Fort Gontrange. So this was typical of the barbed wire systems in front of the fortresses, which the men had to get through. So there were 5 rows of barbed wire like this, and they managed to cut a path through those. But when they reached that iron palisade, which you saw in the previous photograph, they couldn't get through those. So there was no one actually defending the fort when they arrived there. There were about 6 men in it only, but they just could not find a way into that fort. So go to the next slide. So there you can see these iron palisades, pretty difficult to negotiate. Now you've also got like a moat system in front of the casemates. As I said, this is from Fort Contreras, but it's the same design as Fort St. Blaise. So there you get a good idea of just what was facing. These American infantrymen have suddenly come up against this sort of defense. And that's inside the fort. So the forts, all the positions are connected by underground tunnels, which also have a electricity system built in as well down there and everything else. So it's a really strong position to try to take. And this is just amazing, the electrical substation within the fort to control all the electricity, which would operate the turrets and everything else. So I'm just trying to give an idea of just how advanced these forts are. They're just not, they're a built-in fortress, as I say. Yeah. Next slide. So we go back to the battle. So basically the 2 companies had gone forward, and they had, you can see there the advance. Through the vineyards up to the fort. So they'd reached the fort. There'd been no fire on them until they reached the fort. But then the F Company commander, which was Lieutenant Nathan Drake, was killed in action by a sniper. And as soon as that happens, the Germans opened up from both flanks, basically cutting off the 2 companies forward at St. Blaise. So go to the next slide. There you can see this is a Google Earth shot. So you can see the 2 forts. They're the 2 on the right-hand side, and you can see the Moselle back there. So you can see the area that they've had to cover to get up there. You can see the lagoon where the crossing took place, and Horseshoe Wood just on the other side of that. Go to the next slide. So this was in Company F, Pete Tyson, what he talked about when they went up. So climbing the hill towards the fort, we thought it would be a piece of cake, no major problem, even on open ground. Close to the summit, our company commanding officer, Lieutenant Nathan Drake, kneeled down to speak to a wounded German who lay on the ground. As he got up, he was hit right between the eyes, a sniper. I just saw the lieutenant's helmet and glasses fly in the air, and he collapsed, instantly killed. We never found the wounded German again. It was a trap widely used by the Germans, a false wounded soldier to lure the officer in charge. And the sniper to kill the officer. Of course, we scoured the place with our weapons, but the sniper had bolted. Everything spoiled after that. Go to the next slide. That's Lieutenant Drake. He's second from the front there. This was taken about a month earlier, or actually only a couple of weeks earlier, on the advance towards Metz. Next slide. This photo is obviously not taken during the battle. It just talks about the German method here. So the Germans actually had a company from the 17th SS Panzer Grenadiers on each side of that, on each side of the American advance. So it says here, the enemy tried to cut off the 2 assault companies from the starting base. The infiltration of the Germans was so efficient that the 2 companies would have to separate, descending the hill in several bounds. The Germans fired high tracer bullets to throw the Americans into panic and grazing bullets to kill, a well-known SS combat technique, which caused heavy losses. The withdrawal in fighting took a long time. Collecting the wounded slowed down the withdrawal even more. The most part of the company took more than 3 hours to reach Horseshoe Wood, 3 long hours to only cover a mile and a half. At dawn the next day, the last survivors were still pouring into the wood. So these guys had to make their way back and take the losses as they did. And as I said, there were two companies, the 5th Company and the 7th Company from the 2nd Battalion of the 37th SS Panzer Grenadiers from 17th SS Panzer Grenadier Division made the attack. And then there was a 3rd Company which came in from the front, pushing them back. But they managed, as I say, a lot of them managed to get back to the wood. If we go to the next slide. This is just a painting of the sort of conditions the guys were under trying to get back, ducking to the ground, trying to get back in bounds and coming under heavy shell fire as well. Next slide. Mainly mortar fire, actually. And so here you can see a map of what's going on. So you can see the Germans on both sides pushing against those companies, and the companies desperately trying to get back to the bridgehead, which was also coming under pressure. But remember, they had 2 companies in the bridgehead plus the heavy weapons. So if they could get back there, maybe they could hold it. But they certainly couldn't stay up at Fort St. Blaise. Next slide. So that's a picture of Horseshoe Wood today. It's just so it's quite flat there, but quite wooded. And they just set up their foxholes around the perimeter. Perimeter at this stage was about 200 yards in width and 300 yards deep, and that was the perimeter they would try to hold until told otherwise.
Yeah.
So you can just read that. This is Joe Makes. He was with Company K, so this was a company that was back at Horseshoe Wood. Once we took position in the wood, we knew straight away it would be very difficult to hold under the German bombing. The foxholes that we had hastily dug, a company roofs in the wood. We were exposed to enemy fire. It was the first time that I'd been in the front line and under barrage. We had 17 freshly arrived soldiers with us, and only 5 came back. So it was pretty heavy going, and you can see in that photo just though they're clinging to their positions, just trying to hold back the Germans in the wood.
Wow.
It's Norman Rifkin again. We heard from him earlier in the crossing over. He said, in order to protect ourselves from the unceasing shelling of enemy fire, oh, thanks, mate, we were literally buried in our foxholes, which we had dug with our shovels. In order to protect my toilet paper from the omnipresent mud, I'd placed it on my head inside my helmet, which was slightly raised as a result. It was a good thing I did. A bullet passed through my helmet, shattering the paper, but not my head. My clever trick for keeping toilet paper saved my life. I succeeded in taking my helmet home. It is still spattered with mud from Horseshoe Wood. And you can see that picture of Rifkin with his helmet with a bullet hole through it at the top there. Lucky guy.
Yeah.
Next photo. On the left, you can see an aerial photo taken in 1951. You can still see how broken up that wood was at that time. So this is Andy McGlynn. It's with Company G. On the first night, I dug a little trench about the size of my own body and about 1 foot deep. When the German tanks ran along the road near the wood, firing with their guns and machine guns, I made the hole deeper. I took advantage of each lull in the firing to dig deeper. The next day, we suffered numerous artillery shelling. When the shells bounced off the trees, they became aerial bombs. I was alone in my hole, closest comrade being approximately 3 yards away. Andy McGlynn with Company G. So just a thing on those tanks. So as I said, it was a Panzer Grenadier division they were up against. And they had, it was actually their flak battalion, which were 20 millimeter and 37 millimeter guns on tanks, on tank bases, Czech tank bases, and they were moving along the road firing. They didn't get too close because they were worried about bazookas, but they made a hell of a dangerous firing into that Horseshoe Wood with those guns. So from the 8th to 9th of September, you had wave after wave attacking. The wounded was told to stay quiet. There's one man, Private Rex, who took over one of the machine guns, and he swam the river 4 times to try to get help. Meanwhile, the battalion commander, Lemon, he was in Dornot, and he asked to withdraw, but he was told to stay as a diversion because they were going to try another crossing further south. The commander actually in the bridgehead was Captain Ferris Church, who was a battalion operations officer. So there you can see they're talking about evacuating the wounded. This is Nick Pograchak. He was with the engineers. We put boats in a lagoon located on the bank between the Moselle and Dornot to transport the wounded and the German prisoners. During the last trip, we began bringing over the boat filled with wounded. Then suddenly it was hell on earth. Shells were exploding all around. I kept out of this bitch of a boat, I think he's saying. Sorry, I jumped out of the boat, and finally we pulled the boat around, staying close to the bank to take it to the corner furthest away. When we got there, mortar shells blew up the boat. Thankfully, I was out of the boat by then, and how I got out of it, I do not know, because it was really hell out there, and it took me another 2 hours to get out of there. Next slide. Okay, they also obviously needed food and supplies. So this Nick Podrack, who was, as I say, he was just talking about evacuating the wounded. So now he went down to the bank, got into a boat, and a rope had been strung across, and they pulled the boat across to the east bank. I waited for about half an hour and then pulled the boat back with a rope. It was now daylight. When we had left, it was night. By daylight, there was nobody in the boat. He told me the story later. He had taken the food across and unloaded it when he suddenly heard the Germans walking along the bank. They found the food and had a feast. My sergeant had hidden in the water where he stayed a long time. He finally made it back when the bridgehead was evacuated.
And just to pay tribute to those are photos of the information boards that are up there on site. What an amazing
job. Someone's done a fantastic job.
Explain that.
Yeah, someone's done a fantastic job on that. I really, as I say, this story wouldn't be able to be told properly without that information. Someone's interviewed these guys and then made the paintings and then put them up on the storyboards at this place. So it's one of the best battlefield sites I've been to. And because hardly anyone goes there, you can just take your time and just listen to the water going by, and there's no one else around, and you can read this great story. So I advise anyone who's in that area to have a look. Yeah. Next slide. So that's it. That's the Horseshoe Wood today. You can see the storyboards all along the track that you follow along the edge of the river to the other side. So the actual so what was actually happening? So K Company, for example, was now down to 50 men and was commanded by a sergeant. So on the 10th of September, so now this is the third day they've been across there. There was a crossing further south at Arnaville. Where they crossed under, they put a smoke barrage up and crossed under smoke. And so Dornot was no longer needed as a diversion once they had crossed further south. So he got orders to withdraw. So the men were evacuated in 3 leaky boats attached to a rope. Some men actually drowned in the crossing back, probably wounded and couldn't get across. And some men obviously swam across. So go to the next slide. So that's a memorial to these men that's on the side of the wood. And so all in all, the 2nd 11th had 200 casualties. The 23rd Armoured Infantry Battalion also lost 200 men over 4 days. So they're pretty heavy casualties for basically no result here. And just an example, we think that September 1944, everything's going swimmingly. Just going wherever you want, advancing, but that's not the case. And the Germans would actually hang on to Metz till the end of November 1944. So there was a lot of fighting to come, but we'll get into that a bit. But we'll go to the next slide now. So now I want to talk about one of the guys who was in F Company. So this is the company that made the first crossing and advanced up to the fort, came back, fought in the Horseshoe Wood. This guy's name is Jack Kirby. And Jack Kirby was an illustrator. He was actually quite famous at the time. He'd started the Captain America character for comics, and so he was. And this was his first action. On the left, you can see a sketch he made of himself in 1943. So when he was in training, and you can see the young guy. And then on the right is a sketch he made of himself after he came out of this battle, a changed man, and that's what warfare can do with you. So he had joined as a reinforcement at Verdun. So this was he's basically joined, and then a couple of days later he's in his first action. So he, if you go to the next slide. So this is a sketch he made of the fighting. It wasn't made during the fighting. He made this after the fighting, but this is in Horseshoe Wood. So these guys are just hunkering down, trying to survive. And what he said was, the enemy was just plastering us. They were ripping up the earth with heavy machine gun fire, tearing us up with 88s. It was the end of the world. I hung on to one of the boats and I barely made it into the smoke. That's how he got out. We go to the next slide. And of course, his talents as an illustrator, these came from later comics that he was involved with. and he's writing about what happened. And so these are the sort of things he saw that day, in those days at Dornot Bridgehead, and it obviously had a big impact on him. And I believe probably impacted also the characters he later created. If we go to the next slide. So this is straight out of what was going on. He's in Horseshoe Wood, coming under fire. The people are running to try to get out. And then you've got the Germans talking on the right there. We've flushed a pigeon, get him. I just, you're probably the same, Paul, when you're younger, reading these war comics and thinking, how do they come up with this stuff? But here's a guy he's just putting down what he experienced. So
yeah, well, that was the case in Britain. A lot of the Commando comics, they were written by World War II vets. They were illustrated by World War II guys. They just drew on what they knew. It was that was a time. And Jack Kirby, it was a legend. I mean, he's kind of up there with Stan the Man in terms of influence and reputation within comics. Fantastic Four and the Hulk and the Avengers, and yet, as we know, those comics they often hark back to World War II. They were in a kind of a fantasy world, but rooted squarely in real world. Wonder Woman, has the whole World War II and World War I connection. Yeah. So it's extraordinary stuff.
Well, certainly Captain America, and you can imagine in his, in that foxhole thinking, I wish Captain America was here. And then he later created Iron Man and Thor, all these amazing characters from the Avengers.
Yeah.
And here you have again, just that one's interesting because the face of that guy is not shown. And that tells you something as well about what it was like. And here you've got the Germans, of course. And I just find the whole, it just means a lot more. Like looking at this stuff, it's all seems pretty puerile when you think about it, but it's actually what happened. And here's the Germans trying to enter Horseshoe Wood to get the to get the Americans who were sheltering there. Next slide. And that's another one of the other guys. It's guy, I think he's Sergeant Sitkowski. He was also one of the men in the bridgehead, and he was later sketched by Kirby. They rested in a brickworks just south of Dornot after the battle, and had a bit of time to rest and reflect. And Kirby got out his pencil and did some sketches, which to me are very powerful and tell a lot of the story about the battle. Just looking at the face of that guy, what he's been through, I find him absolutely quite powerful. Next one, and there you can see some of the work that Jack Kirby created later. So he joined Marvel Comics in 1958, and all these characters and the characters now you see in the movies and that they're all his creations. And as I say, you can see how it harks back to this battle, this first battle he's been in. But he's not a guy who's just sat at an office desk and thought of it. He's experienced battle, and a lot of that comes out in his work.
Yeah.
So we'll talk a little bit about the crossing at Arnaville. So Arnaville is just further south. So Dornot is just off the north of that map. So Arnaville is where they made the next crossing, and it's where the 10th Regiment got involved, and they managed to get across. And by this stage, it should be mentioned that these operations were basically taking place without air power in support. Most of the air power is being used at Brest. At this stage, they were still reducing the fortress at Brest over in Brittany, and a lot of the air support was being used there. And also a lot of the fighters were being used to escort the C-47s, which are now coming into Rems, that open Rems airfield, and they're bringing petrol supplies and supplies into there for the troops to advance. So, so one thing they did have here, though, they got the artillery in order, and they could break up those German attacks with artillery fire. Was a big strength of the American army, and if they had enough ammunition, they could break up those attacks with artillery fire. And also, they made that crossing under smoke, so they got across, and that was. As I say, that meant that the Dornot operation was no longer necessary. Go to the next slide. So that's the That's the crossing area at Arnaville. So this is further south, similar sort of area to Dornot. But there you can see once they crossed, they had quite an open area, so they had to push their bridgehead out pretty quick. They didn't have the wooded area to shelter in. But yeah, that was where the second crossing was made, and that's a plaque to the crossing, which was made between the 10th and 16th of September 1944. It's the memory of the valiant soldiers, the American soldiers of the 5th Division. So it's remembering the 5th Division at that point. And it's talking about 698 GIs were either killed or wounded during that battle for our liberty. So this is for the French liberty. And I just find that a nice little memorial to have finished off the story with. So we'll just go to the next slide. Can we blow that up a bit, Paul? Because I just wanted to sort of show what's...
No, not really, unfortunately.
Okay, so that's fine. You'll see Metz in the middle there, and you can see now they're forming. So this is 25th of September. So we're going forward another 2 weeks, and you can see how difficult they're finding it to break through. There was the big attacks further south also near Nancy, where the Americans had also got across. And so these, they were running into trouble. There were a lot of German forces now been put into that area, including Panzer divisions and Panzer Grenadier divisions. And so the next slide will show them. So this is coming on now to November when they were trying to encircle Metz. So that took until November. And then it wasn't until December 19th that they could actually push on towards Saarbrücken. And so they're still short of the Rhine. And of course, soon after that, the Battle of the Bulge took place. So they were still in those positions in February 1945. So you can see how much this battle. So Dornot was just one little part of that battle, but it illustrates quite clearly the hardening of the German defences as they got closer to. Because the German supply lines were short.
Well, it kind of symbolises that kind of concertina effect you've had since Normandy, in that the first part of Overlord went really well, then it slows down for weeks, then you have the breakout where it all speeds up again in Paris and pushing onto the Belgian border. The push into Brittany is incredible. The Pontabeau Bridge, where 9 divisions cross out of Avranches in a matter of hours, and then by early September, the speed is reduced to a halt again, isn't it? To a crawl again, and all through September into October with this and the Metz and then the Hurtgen Forest, and it's not that the wheels fall off the Allied plan. It's just that it slows down to becoming that attritional fight again that it had been earlier.
It all became a logistics war at this stage, and until they could open their logistics hubs. I mean, even though they took Brest, they actually didn't really use it as a.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of the supplies were still coming in across the beaches, and as they opened Cherbourg, and obviously further north, they were trying to get. They had their trouble getting the channel ports, and also obviously getting Antwerp in time. So the logistics supplies, logistics were going to hold this whole thing up until 1945, particularly after the failure of Market Garden as well. So
the obvious question that was coming up in the side earlier is air power, is close air support. Those forts, those fortresses, that they seem to be bringing in some kind of air power, fighter bombers, light bombers. What's the situation in early September with fighter support, close air support?
Well, as I say, most of it at this stage was at Brest. So when they finally got air support available, so they would use P-47 Thunderbolts equipped with bombs underneath to target directly. So Fort Driant. So Fort Driant is the next one north of the Verdun, the forts we were talking about. And Fort Driant was quite strong, and it had guns firing. And they tried bombing that, and they took till November until they surrendered that one. And there was another one, Fort Jeanne d'Arc, which is further north as well. Was also took a lot of trouble. As I say, it wasn't until the end of November that the Germans in the fortresses finally surrendered, and that was after Metz had surrendered. So the air power wouldn't really have make a dent in those forts. They were so strongly fortified. And as I say, the Germans could just shelter underground. They had power, they had water, they had food. once they got organised. So,
and it's just worth putting up that map again to remind just how far the Third Army was spread. And of course, you've got everything happening down in the south as well with the army down there. They're stretching themselves. I mean, it's as we talked about with Alan Allport last week. It's that kind of risk reward thing. The Allies are on the front foot. They're dictating the plays, if to use an American football analogy, but every play needs support. Every play needs fuel, artillery shells, ammunition, support. And although there's kind of plenty, there's not plenty if you're mounting all these operations at the same time, which is essentially what the Allies are doing. You know, they're not biting off more than they can chew. They're trying to establish themselves as dictating a battlefield, but it's causing issues on the ground in certain places.
Well, if you go back to that map again, the first, So have a look at the southern front. So that entire southern front is still that's still German territory. So they're basically protecting the entire southern front. That's south of the Loire River. Yeah, they're protecting that with air power. So that's the other reason that air power wasn't available at the front. And plus, the airfields are still back in Normandy. And so until they, particularly at Reims, they got Reims up and running reasonably quickly, but they were using Reims as a transport hub to bring, so that they couldn't base fighter bombers there so much. So it took a while to get all these things organised. Once they got organised, sure, they could kick on again. But
but then as they get organised, so the bad weather sets in. That's
it's coming up to winter, isn't it? Yeah, it's coming into to fall and winter. So as I say, I find it a pretty interesting area, and that area sort of around between Verdun and Metz, particularly, it's been fought over for centuries, and there's and there's a good reason. It was the border, obviously, of Lorraine. So
and again, the whole point of doing these shows on the channel, the Brittany ones like this, the ones about still got some dragoon stuff coming up, is that the idea a lot of us have is that after the liberation of Paris, we leap straight forward to Market Garden. There's a hell of a lot of stuff happening in between those, some of which is going well, some of which is going less well, frankly. But to overlook all that other fighting is not good.
Yeah, that's right. And actually, 12th Corps, which was south of 20 Corps, they'd actually tried crossing. They'd got across on the 5th of September, like 3 days before Dornot, but they got absolutely hammered at near Pont-de-Mousson, and they had to come back.
And there were also Americans in Luxembourg at this point, I think, were fighting.
They're moving. So they're moving around the top of Thionville as well, up into Luxembourg, and obviously they're up near the Hurtgen. By the first crossing into the Siegfried line was in September, so that was Bradley's first army was moving pretty rapidly as well. So things were really happening. But obviously they got, they went into the Hurtgen forest around Aachen. Everything stiffened up, and when you're entering German territory, there's a different dynamic at work as well in terms of how strongly enemy are going to defend that territory.
And of course, the whole point is that the German supply lines are reducing in length. As the Allies are extending, they're reducing, and they have the Rhine in the west, and they have other rivers over to the east as the Soviets are pushing them back there. But the Germans are the stereotypical wounded animal by now, aren't they? They're fighting even more desperately now because it's the homeland that's under threat now. That they can concentrate their forces better. And as we said earlier, some of these forces that perhaps the Allied intelligence were dismissing, the schools, the training units, and we look at the battalions that ended up engaging the British at Arnhem. The intelligence might have said, "Oh yeah, they're old men, young boys. They'll crumble," and the reality was they often didn't.
The other thing that was happening in September is because of dragoon, and so the Allies had pulled units out of Italy for dragoon. The Germans also pulled units out of Italy. So the 3rd Panzer Grenadier Division was attacked, was counterattacking. There were two Panzer divisions near Nancy, which were counterattacking 12th Corps, 4th Armored Division, who were trying to get across down at Nancy, and so they were hitting them very hard with counterattacks, and so they were quite strong divisions. They were actually fighting in tropical kit from Italy. So
wow,
the Germans were responding just as the Allies were, shifting units around. making Italy a secondary theatre. So the Germans did the same. So they were on interior lines, so they could move them quicker as well. So.
And I think we can kind of forgive the Allies for wanting to be a bit aggressive at this point now, because the V weapons are causing problems in the UK. Yep. There's a fear about them. There'd been that kind of elation post-Paris that we've got the Germans cracked. We've got 3 goals. Let's go for a 4th and 5th goal and end the match right now. Everyone fears the winter is coming, and so I can understand why there is this reasoning behind pushing on all these fronts and pushing on Luxembourg and pushing at Metz and pushing in Netherlands. But now, with the benefit of hindsight, we can see that some of these operations get a little bit unstuck, and there's just fatigue setting in with some of the commanders. Some of them have been at it at the sharp end for 2 or 3 years or more by this point. Everyone's kind of getting a bit knackered as well, which isn't helping.
And there's a lot of new units coming. A lot of these units is their first time in battle, so you can look anywhere in war. And I've studied a lot of war in the Pacific as well. We had really crack Australian units, for example, and some crack American units in the Pacific. But their first battle was always like, wow, generally there's a problem. So it just takes a while to get experienced and get things working. Yeah.
Well, Phil, we'll leave things there, and you're off to the to Guadalcanal with Dave Hollands and JD from History Underground soon.
So that's right. Yeah, in a couple of weeks.
I won't say I'm not jealous, because I am. So you've just come back from New Guinea and Kokoda and Buna and all that. So
staying busy.
It's the busy life of a traveling historian. We're so grateful you've taken time to take out and do this, and the fact the illustrations and photos are fantastic. So
I just think it's a great story, and I hope people also get something out of that. And I hope people are encouraged. Like a lot of people they'll visit Normandy, and they'll visit the Bulge, perhaps maybe Holland for the market garden operation. But get yourself down to the Moselle and have a look at. Have a look at some of these battles down there. They're pretty fascinating. A lot less people around, and very rewarding, as I found when I went there. Yeah,
brilliant stuff. Well, folks, we're back again tomorrow morning, but an hour later, Patrick Bishop is joining us to talk about. We're going back to Paris and some of the stories he found, putting his new book together, and then more stuff during the week. We're kind of edging into Market Garden, but there is some Dragoon stuff coming up and Arnaville stuff. Still putting shows together, but in the meantime, click like and subscribe. We're kind of getting out, hopefully, of the kind of the summer lower viewing figures to some slightly higher figures again, so that's really good. Buy my guests' books. Phil's previous appearances on World War II TV are in the description below, so you can check them out. Some of them have done fantastic views over the last few months, so that's fantastic stuff. So thank you, Phil. Thank everybody for your comments. I'll enjoy the rest of your Sunday. This is Paul Woodadge for World War II TV saying thanks very much. Cheers. Bye.
Thanks, Paul.